Welcome, everybody. It is Business Monday here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Thank our friends over at Deepwater Wind. I'm Josh Fenton. This is the Money Man, Gary Sasse. Lots going on in business, high finance, international trade, politics, road building. We've got it all. Let's start with state. Little news coming out late last week. State's got in a booming economy. Record growth, more people working than ever before. We've still got a deficit.
Well, that's what happens when you adopt probably one of the worst budgets that we can remember. It's interesting, when the governor submitted her budget originally, the governor was projecting an $87 million deficit in the next fiscal year, which starts July of 2019, which wasn't bad. It was about 2% deficit. And all of a sudden, a few months later, the deficit is projected to be almost 160 million.
Right.
And it becomes an issue. It's a 4% deficit. And so you sit back and ask your question, why in this good economy did this happen? And a lot of it just was fiscal irresponsibility. I don't know any other way to describe it. To give you some examples, employee raises, weren't originally budgeted. That added to a structural deficit.
Right.
Use of one-time revenue, using the fiscal 18 surplus of about $30 million. Revenues continuing to grow, faster. Expenditures continue to grow faster than revenues. And so you see a whole number of conscious decisions made that increased the deficit. It doubled the deficit from what the governor was originally projecting. And that should never happen in good economic times.
And is that just straight out, is some of it election year spending? In other words, I don't want to be fiscally responsible while I'm running for re-election because I don't want to make cuts or tweak the budget during the operational year because that interest group or that union might get upset with me?
Well, there's always a political calculus in an even-numbered year budget. So, certainly. But the fact of the matter is, even with a political calculus, when you submit a budget and you project a 2% deficit in the subsequent year, and that deficit turns out to be 4%, that should never happen.
Oh, by the way, 4%, and what are we, a month and a half, 2 months into the new fiscal year?
Yeah, but that's 4% for the next fiscal
year.
Starting
That's what I'm saying, but it's only...
Yeah, and there's probably a deficit, in this budget. So I think it's a classic case of we've had structural budget deficits for at least a decade, probably 2 decades. They fluctuate. They reduce themselves when the economy gets better. When the economy is tough, they increase. And now we have a structural deficit doubling above the original forecast in a good economic time. So then you have to go back and say, well, why? And the factors that I mentioned, not budgeting for employee pay increases, you're using one-time revenue, the scoops, using a surplus to balance the budget, not recognizing the fact that you can't continue to live in a situation where spending grows by 3.5%, revenues grow by less than 2%. That's known. Those were decisions made that people said, we'll worry about it. I think they said, we'll worry about it after the election. Well, the policy consequences are very significant because we need to invest in urban schools. We need to invest in certain social programs. If we're going to continue to expand Medicaid, not reform it and cut it. We always have to be looking at our tax strategy and tax policy. And when the first thing you have to do is remove a 4% deficit, then you really never have the discussion of how you make things better and how you improve things. You're just kind of paddling and doing your dog paddle on the lake.
So there's 8 candidates for governor, and we get press releases and announcements from each one of them certainly on a weekly, if not on a daily basis. None of them are talking about structural deficits, and none of them are talking about budget deficits. Why not? Why aren't Republicans hammering Governor Raimondo on that issue? Isn't that the core to the differences of the two parties?
Well, no, I think both parties, we've been in the state long enough. I've worked with fiscally responsible members of both parties.
Yeah.
Both as members of the legislature and in the governor's office. Bruce Sutter was a fiscally responsible governor. Matty Smith, the old speaker, was a very conservative guy,
Yeah.
physically. So it's not necessarily a partisan thing. In state government, you don't have to be a Democrat or Republican to want to balance the budget. Now, that you may have different ways, approaches to balance the budget, and one side may increase taxes, may not want to cut spending, one may focus more on the spending side, but that doesn't matter. The fiscal policy should be a responsible, balanced budget. And why isn't that more of the debate? I don't know. I would give Pat Morgan credit. When she was active in the budget debates and minority leader, she put out some strong statements. The Republicans Party was very critical of this year's budget in their statements. They pointed out some of the shortcomings. Now, why isn't it following into the campaign? I don't know.
Not sexy? Is it just not a sexy
Well,
issue?
it can become a sexy issue after September 12th.
Yeah.
When there's the person who submitted the budget, is effect the chief executive officer of the state, and we're facing this kind of fiscal issue, then that might be the appropriate time to debate it. The other thing you need to be very careful about, we're talking about a projection, we're talking about a forecast. The economy can take off just like gangbusters, and this deficit can be solved by or reduced and minimized by what happens to the economy.
But can you, we have record revenue on hotel taxes. We have record employment. We have, most of the the indicators are performing and performing at all-time highs. At some point, you've got to say, and Mike DeBiase was on here one day, the director of administration for the Raimondo administration, said it straight out. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem.
Right, and so what is this administration, what is the legislature doing about the spending problem? When you look at these results and you look at the forecast to date, you say they're doing the wrong things, not bringing this under control. But we'll see. The economy may get better and it may improve, but it's got us in a kind of a fiscal limbo or fiscal purgatory. We're not going to hell. It could certainly be managed, but you can't get to heaven. You can't get the right decisions made to move the state forward because you're always backpedaling against this irritants, this fiscal irritants. And it shows a lack of seriousness on the part of state government not wanting to get it under control. And for the third time, I repeat myself, how can it possibly double from the original forecast unless you just totally disregard fiscal matters?
Let's go down to Washington, D.C. The details are sketchy. There's news that the U.S. is close to a trade agreement. Do not call it NAFTA. The president says it's not NAFTA. It's a new trade agreement with Mexico. As of right now, Canada is not a part of it. The stock market liked it. Last checked in about an hour ago, the market was up 250 and liked the idea of getting out of this trade wars and into a substantial structure for trade moving forward. Your thoughts, and without nobody's seen the details yet.
Well, anytime we can open up, borders and have free trade in this hemisphere, it's good. So, if Mexico is satisfied with it, if we've made some modifications to NAFTA to protect some of the jobs that we did lose. NAFTA was a funny thing. NAFTA was a good thing. I support NAFTA, I still do. But what
you and your friend Bill Clinton, two Southerners working together on
Southerners are free traders. That's why the South is doing well. But the point being, what we underestimated, were there are pockets where NAFTA would have an adverse impact on individuals and people. So there might be a town in Ohio that had a factory.
Absolutely.
And had 500 jobs in that factory, and they were hurt. They were hurt.
Well,
by
it must
NAFTA.
have been Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin, because those are the swing states that Trump pounded away on and beat Hillary Clinton.
So so it needed to be fixed because there was some impact on jobs and that we didn't anticipate. Overall, it's been pretty good. It's important that Canada be involved with this. Last time I looked, they were on our borders, too. And the president personalizing his debate with the Prime Minister of Canada is not a very seemly thing. But no, the trade agreement with Mexico, I think it's potential is very positive, but don't know the details.
Yeah, I guess during this morning's press conference, the president of Mexico was on with reporters simultaneous to the president via conference call. So, you know, a lot of indications that that's on its way to some cleanup. Let's talk about just straight up governing. Little more than a week ago, DOT announced major rehab or began the process. They'd actually announced it about 2 weeks earlier, but it began the process of improvements to 195 and specifically the Gano Street exit. The Gano Street exit is really, if you're coming in from the East Bay, one of only 2 exits while you're on 195 to enter the city of Providence. And not a lot of public education, a lot of chaos once the process began. People stuck in traffic from their 30-minute commutes were now 2-hour commutes. I was driving down to Newport Friday morning at 10:30, and the traffic going into the city was still backed up 2-3 miles beyond Seekonk, pretty much record backups. Over the weekend, DOT reversed itself to some degree after a lot of controversies and a lot of awkward moments with the governor's office to make some changes, open up another lane to try and eliminate or reduce the amount of traffic congestion. How can government be so inept in 2018 to not be able to plan out a construction project on an exit?
Well, you know, it's easy to sit here and have hindsight and second guess. What DOT did was really to reduce capacity by 40%. And they had computer models, so the first answer is that the computer models weren't very good. There's also, you have to look back at the culture and the history of agencies. DOT has never had the reputation of being a very consumer-friendly agency.
Really, you think so?
I don't think so. I know, I think, when I worked in state government, I used to think of DOT as the iron triangle. They were the road builders in one apex, they were the unions in the others, and then there were the people that worked at DOT. And,
right.
And everything was,
they all went to work for one another, they all,
if you thought
100%.
If you thought about convenience, that was the culture. Now, we're trying to break that culture, and there've been certainly the opening of the highway and the education that was done there was very good. So they just, they blew it. They made a mistake. I give DOT, credit for admitting the mistake and trying to correct it. It goes beyond comprehension why you think you can close 40% of your capacity and not create some log jams. But
before schools go back to and before the colleges
they're working,
come in.
They're working to create it. Some of the projects are not coordinated with other projects. But I think the governor is setting the wrong tone. When I asked about it, the governor said she wasn't a traffic engineer.
Right. Not my problem. I'm not a traffic engineer.
And then when we had UHIP and people couldn't get their food stamps or their medical payments, I guess her excuse then was, I'm not a social worker.
Right.
I'm more an eligibility technician.
Right.
Well, the governor is a traffic engineer. Governor is a social worker, certainly responsible for those people. And the fundamental of government is to focus on stewardship, of running a consumer-friendly government. Every business in this country and the world right now, recognizes that if you're not customer-friendly, you're going to go out of business. And what we teach up at Bryan of idea design thinking, is really focused on having the business as responsive as it can be to the customer. And without getting into the weeds, what's happening in this administration, when you look at UHIP, when you look at the episode, with the Washington, Bridge, when you look at lines at DMV, is that there seems to be a disconnect between the people at the very top level who should have a culture of being customer friendly, of making life as convenient as they can for the people the state has to provide services to, and not necessarily focusing their energy on just corporate welfare, attracting XYZ company. We'd be better off attracting people from Barrington or from the East Bay and say it's not going to take you an hour and a half to get to work, which has a cost, by the way. There's no free lunch.
Oh, absolutely, right.
And so I think you raised a really good question, because I think there's a broader issue of how does this administration view their responsibility to provide good quality.
But isn't
basic
there just,
service.
I mean, first of all, there is an analysis and there is technology to be able to make the analysis. Second of all, there is something called common sense. When the first press release came, I want to say the beginning of August, that said, Gano Street exit is going to be closed. Every single person in this office looked at each other and said, oh, that's going to be a disaster. Then you read further on that it's going to happen for 18 months. Disaster, catastrophic disaster. Plus, you're running for re-election. Do you really want to offend everyone on half the state during your re-election process? There's only 2 roads in Rhode Island. There's 95 and there's 195. Okay, you close down one of them, it's going to have an impact on everybody trying to go to work, trying to pick up their kids, trying to drop them off, trying to go to soccer practice, etc.
Well, I had an appointment before I came here in Wayland Square, and I come in from East Greenwich. So I got off, at the mall, and I went up Memorial Drive.
Did you
and
really?
it took me 5 minutes longer to get there. So for the public education support, people make mistakes. The computer program was a mistake. Certainly the engineers, traffic engineers at DOT, didn't take their computer models and actually, walk it through and then look at what the contingencies, might be. You're right, there wasn't a good public education program. All that said.
And by the way, all this during August when about 10 to 15% of the workforce is on some level of vacation.
Yeah, but so there's some mistakes were made. They're in the process now of correcting those mistakes. And I'm sure things will get better, but
everybody who gets stuck in any traffic jam coming in from 195 for the next few months will blame Governor Raimondo and Rhode Island DOT fairly or unfairly because of this blunder.
Well, you have to also think about programming your work out. And everywhere you travel in this state right now, there's construction. Now, we're all for good infrastructure, we're all for having good roads. We pay a lot to have good roads. But in planning out your work, you have to recognize that there are interconnections between this road system. And then I don't know what they're thinking about it.
Alvini was on the radio today and said, listen, we're trying to make up for 30 years of behind projects. Okay, but you don't need to do them all in one summer in an election year. Let's jump over. Jump over to downtown Providence.
Jump over the bridge.
Tallest building in downtown Providence has been vacant for 5 going on 6 years. One Financial Plaza, the old Hospital Trust Tower, just sold for about $12–13 million less than it sold in 2007. Low 50s million dollars it sold in 2007 for $68 million. Go over behind Superman, Citizens Tower, Citizens Plaza is the name of it. That building, which is Citizens corporate headquarters, is on the auction blocks. And if we go up Westminster Street to 380, full of government, federal government operations, long-term leases through the General Services Administration. That building went into receivership. Joe Paolino bought it for a little less than $9 million. It had sold most recently in 2007 or 8 for $22 million. Is this, in this booming economy, with new buildings being built in downtown Providence, a little bit of a worry indicator that your commercial real estate infrastructure, the tallest, most valuable buildings in this core of the city, are all losing value? This is not happening in New York City or Boston, Massachusetts, or Worcester, Massachusetts at the same time. Those buildings are flying up in value.
Well, we've gone.
That's a yes or no? No,
no,
I kid.
Maybe. We've been going through change, for decades. You go downtown, and the economy has changed.
Right.
The banks are no longer headquartered here. Other companies are not headquartered here. The nature of work has changed.
Right.
People can work in Nevada and provide services here. So the nature of work has changed. And when the nature of work changes, then the infrastructure to support the work, is affected by it. And it's the one thing to say, well, it's not happening in Boston, it's happening in Providence. Well, Providence is not Boston. There's just very significant, differences in scale and where headquarters are and corporations are. So having, and having said that, you really come back to a couple of issues. The first issue is, where is the leadership and the vision? I don't have an easy plan for this, but we've talked about this before. We're off worrying about the I-195 project. A good project, but then doesn't mean you don't have a vision and you ignore the rest of the city, which has happened. We talk about tax burden. Legislature hasn't done squat to deal with property taxes. Eliminating the tax on motor vehicles is helpful, but it's not an economic development driver.
No. Providence has the 5th highest commercial real estate tax in the country, and it's got to be part of the factor of what some of this value loss is.
But just don't focus on government. Then come back and say, where are the movers and shakers in the private sector? Who's going to see the mayor? Who is going to see the city council? Who are the business leaders? Because the city government can have vision, but the city government is not a business. It can't reinvent downtown.
Right.
And I'm beginning to really question where's the old partnership that existed between the city of Providence and the business community? Where is the business community? I haven't heard anybody in the business community, stand up and raise hell. I haven't seen the business community organize itself and say, boy, Providence is declining faster than it should. It can't be what it was. This is what it needs to be. This is a priority.
Right.
And it gets back to the second most urban state in the country not having an urban strategy. I guess Jersey, in terms of density, is a more urban state. But we're one of the most urban states in the country, and we don't have a strategy for urban economic development. And I'll go back and pointing fingers. So we have the business community not working on this. We have Commerce Rhode Island, giving these grants with any really strategic focus on how you rebuild communities. Of the hundreds of millions of dollars that Commerce Rhode Island spent, 2.9 was some Main Street programs to plant flowers and make things a little more pleasant in some of the urban communities.
Right.
So we're sitting here with a city that's got a broken tax system. We're sitting here with a city that has a changing demographic. It's a poorer city, less of a middle class city. We're sitting here with a business community that is not out there full of piss and vinegar, saying we got to rebuild this downtown and having some vision. We moved the rivers, and Buddy Cianci takes a lot of credit, but also a lot of credit goes to people at the Chamber of Commerce, that Bruce Sunderland, when he was president of the Chamber. These people are not here anymore.
Yeah, no, there's a significant void there. It's also going to be a significant loss of revenue to the city. I mean, these new property owners who are taking over these buildings aren't going to pay the taxes on its valuation at $68 million if they paid $52 million.
And so you got a classified tax structure, and you think you can, when you lose the revenues from the people that you're not taxing fairly to begin with,
right,
the way the classification system works, and you're going to tell the homeowners that we have to increase your taxes? Good luck.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump to the governor's race. Always a fun time where 2 weeks and a couple days before, it's a Wednesday primary because of Rosh Hashanah, thanks to Swift reporter Rachel Nunes. I was not aware of that, but it's going to be a Wednesday primary. We've had no debates on either side. We're expecting no functional debates on either side. We've had a lot of debates about the debates, but there's been no airing of people's records. There's no discussion about vision. And I don't think there's a tremendous amount of excitement about either of these races right now coming out of the summer. Have you ever seen anything like it?
Well, ask me that question about 3 weeks from now, because it could change radically.
It absolutely could.
After September 12th. Right now, this is almost like the preliminaries. There are a lot of candidates. It's summer.
There's 8 candidates right now.
Yeah, and so let's see who the Republican and Democrat parties have as their nominees, and let's then judge if there's any vision, leadership, and direction.
Let's go Republicans. Any chance Pat Morgan could beat Alan Fung in the Republican primary?
I don't handicap those things. I have no way of knowing. I can't even get into that.
There's going to be sports betting up at Twin River in a short period of time. You're a Florida State guy. You're not going to be up there voting, betting on the Florida State Clemson game.
All I care about is being in Tallahassee on Labor Day to see us play Virginia Tech. That's one step at a time. You know, Pat, they're both credible candidates. You know, they both have records.
All right, let's jump over the other side. Let's see if you'll feel more comfortable handicapping when you don't have to talk to your Republican friends. Matt Brown, Gina Raimondo. Any chance you could see one of these progressive upsets? We've seen them around the country. They're unexpected. They come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden everybody's scratching their head. And I'll just say, a year ago, it happened here in Rhode Island, 2 years ago, when everybody was predicting Hillary Clinton, who had pounded Barack Obama 8 years earlier in Rhode Island. This was Clinton country in Rhode Island. Bernie Sanders beat her 54.7 to 43%, right, Rachel?
But the difference was this, that Hillary Clinton didn't have any power of incumbency in Rhode Island. And,
but Clintons had power of incumbency.
No,
I push back.
No,
they had owned this state for 20 years.
When I talk about power
politically.
You know, it's doing things for special interest groups.
Okay, Bernie Sanders hadn't either. Bernie Sanders beat her, like, I don't want to say like a drum, but by a pretty good margin.
I'm saying
it was unexpected. Is there any chance Matt Brown upsets Gina Raimondo?
Well, I would be very surprised, because Gina has done a good job keeping Democratic interest groups and constituencies together. It's called network politics, and she has built a network. And the point I was trying to make is you can't compare the ability of a governor or an incumbent in a state to build a network and do favors and pander to people versus a primary for a presidential race. So I'm not sure there's a parallel there. I would be very surprised if Brown, you know, won this thing. The other thing, and let's just be very candid about this thing, money is not the most important thing in the world. You know, President Trump, you know, proved that. But money becomes more important in a small state than in a big state, particularly when there's huge differences in resources and capacity. And politics is about in getting out the vote. And so if you're running a close race,
yeah,
then the party that's most capable of getting out their vote has an advantage. Well, we have one campaign that has $7 million. We have a Democratic Party that has 500 million, a Republican Party that
500,000.
500,000. We have a Republican Party that has a few, you know, tens
$7, $8. What's the Republican Party got?
I don't know what they have.
$85.
But the point was, you need those resources to get out 5 or 6% of your vote, and unless you.
Well, let me throw a little curveball to you. The power structure of Rhode Island wanted to do a deal for the Paw Sox, right? It was Skeffington and Tom Ryan and Terry Murray and Gina Raimondo and Nick Mattiello and the Providence Journal, right? Big heavyweights on one side of the scale. And on the other side, opposing it over the last 2 years was, you know, libertarians and some progressives and a few people over here and maybe GoLocal editorials, and that seemed out of whack. And
well, what was not out of whack was the specter of 38 studios. And so you had a lot of people who were sitting in the state legislature who had to have their arm twisted. You had a specter of Commerce Rhode Island giving out hundreds of
But we'd already voted on 38 studios in elections previous. We'd already had those who voted for 38 studios get reelected in competitive races where their opponents tried to make it. So I'll give that a 5%er. But in the overall scheme of things, we've already vetted 38 studios from an electoral standpoint.
It's easy to say, but if you're running for office in a district in Cranston and Warwick, and you think most of your constituents will oppose to that, you're going to be, you know, very careful. You're not going to want to exercise a profile and courage unless the leadership really pushes you. And you speak about, you know, leadership and process on this thing. You know, it's fine to say the governor was for it, you know, but unless you're willing to use political capital and fight for it, I'm not sure what that means.
Right.
And I didn't see any leadership of political capital coming out of the governor's office. I know that Commerce Rhode Island was helping the Paw Sox, was negotiating with the Paw Sox and helping the city, but I didn't see any political capital coming out of this. And when you had a speaker, for whatever reason, it may have been political, it may have been substantive, I'm not going to try to question its motives, you know, raises a lot of questions, then you have to use that capital to win the fight. and no one felt it was important enough, except the mayor of Pawtucket, to bring the fight to to join the fight.
That poor guy, on a closing note, that poor guy who's lost his hospital and 800 jobs, Gamba Theater, Paw Sox, and looking at trouble on the Hasbro side. Not an easy time to be mayor of an industrial city in Rhode Island.
Well, it's not an easy time to be a mayor of a city in Rhode Island, because a few minutes ago we spoke about the challenges in the city of Providence.
Absolutely.
Capital city. And some of us used to say, you know, as goes Providence, so goes the economic health of the state.
Yep.
Well, you've talked about Pawtucket experiencing fiscal economic stress. You've talked about downtown Providence experiencing economic stress. And that's the vision and the leadership question. Who is going to stand up for an urban strategy? Who is going to stand up and say, no, it's not about I-195 and this cutesy innovation district. It's really about rebuilding our cities or revitalizing our cities. And that takes money, it takes leadership from both the private and the public sectors. And we know we have finite resources, but there's no reason why we don't have fully public and more effective leadership.
Okay, no prediction on the GOP primary, no prediction on the Democrat. Let's go where your comfort zone, Florida State versus Virginia Tech.
I'm not going to jinx this. I don't make predictions.
As sports betting opens up across Rhode Island, he will not be the host of our new sports gambling show. Let's put it that way.
You will never see me. The only thing I can guarantee about this whole conversation is you'll never see me walk into a betting parlor and lay a quarter down.
I want to thank the money man, Gary Sasse. As always, we covered it all in this half hour. Coming up in just a moment, Saul Kaplan, back from Ireland. He'll be more innovative with an Irish brogue than we can ever imagine. Here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We'll be right back.